Hello and welcome to the second part of this digital photo video lesson. My name's Kingsley Singleton and I'm going to be showing you how to make some dramatic improvements to this picture. In the first part of the lesson we looked at transforming the foreground, toning the image and adding contrast. And just a quick glance at the layers palette here on the right hand side will show you the work that we've done. We've got our original background image and all these adjustment layers sitting above it. But now we're going to add a little bit more interest to the sky by blending in a flock of birds. So just come up to File, down to Open, and this time we'll pick the image called Flock. So here we've got a flock of, well, I'm not really sure what they are, but they were very kindly donated by my colleague on Birdwatching magazine. Most important thing is they're going to look great when added to our montage landscape. So to get them in there, just press Control on the keyboard and then A, and that brings up our marching ants all the way around the sides of the image there, and then Control and C to copy everything inside those marching ants into the system's memory. We can now close down that shot and press Control and V on the keyboard to paste our flock of birds into the image we're working on. And then in the Layers palette we'll just click on the layer thumbnail there and drag it down the stack so it's just sitting above the background layer. Now of course we want our flock of birds to be at the top of the image, so click on the Move tool and then we'll drag it upwards and place it just about there. And I think we'll also just need to transform that new layer of birds in a little bit because they're looking a bit too big at the moment. So with it still highlighted in the Layers palette, Control and T again on the keyboard, bringing up our Free Transform marquee and then holding down Shift on the keyboard, click and drag those corner handles in, and then we can just click inside the bounding box and move that up to around there. We want them to sort of fill the frame pretty much, so we'll also just angle them in a little bit there, just as we did with those fence posts, holding the cursor outside the corner handle there and clicking and dragging. When you're happy with the positioning of that layer, just click the tick. And then, to blend them in nicely with the background, just come over to where it says Normal, click on the downward facing arrow and choose Soft Light from the list. And there you can see they've dropped in rather nicely. And they're really giving us some interest in the top half of the picture that wasn't there before. Now I'm just going to darken off this layer a little bit because it's not working quite as I want. So just with it selected in the Layers palette, hold down Control and press L on the keyboard to bring up our Levels palette. This time we're not using an adjustment layer, and then I'm going to click and drag the middle slider to the right, and as I do that you should see this hard line here disappear. There it goes. So we've just dragged it over to about 0.77, darkening the midtones and helping it to blend in. We'll just hit OK to exit the palette, and a bit like in the first part of this tutorial with the fence posts, we're now going to use the eraser tool to just get rid of some of those birds that are overlapping the foreground, just clicking on them and erasing them away. And that levels adjustment that we made should have gotten rid of that hard edge, but if you do see any sign of it, you can use the eraser to delete it. We'll also just hold back the flock of birds a little bit from around the windmill there, just making sure that they don't cross over with it too much, and then come back out to a full view, and that's starting to look pretty good. The texture of the flock of birds in the sky is giving us some nice balance to the picture, but it's still looking maybe a little bit absent in the foreground. So to fix that, I'm going to perch a crow on top of this closest fence post. Just come up to File and down to Open, and we'll pick the file called crow.jpg. And then to move our crow into our montage, just click on the rectangular marquee tool and we'll drag out a selection around the bird, and then just as we did for the flock, press Control and C on the keyboard to copy all those pixels into memory, click the X to close it down, and then back on our montage, press Control and V, and in it pops. Now he's quite nice looking, this crow, but he's actually facing the wrong direction. We want him looking sort of into the frame. So come up to Edit and down to Transform and pick Flip Horizontal. That'll swap him round. And then click on the Move tool, and we can click and drag him roughly into position. Now we're going to cheat a little bit here just by briefly lowering the opacity of the crow down to about 60%, just so that we can sit him nicely on top of that fence post. Let's just zoom in there a bit so we get a good look at what we're doing. And although his feet are kind of pretty much lining up with the top of the post there, I'm not really very happy about the size of the crow overall in the frame. I want it to be much larger and more dominant. So it's back to the free transform tool, Control and T on the keyboard, and holding down the Shift key, again just drag out those corner handles. I'm going to bring this up to about 180%. Just check up there in the options bar to see what size you're enlarging to. Now the problem here is that even though we can click and rotate him pretty much into position, his leading leg is no longer lining up with the top of the post. Well, that's not going to be a problem, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to distort that leg to make it look much more natural. First hit the tick to finalize our transformation, but first I'm just going to erase the parts of this crow layer that we don't want. So back to the eraser tool, and then we can just click and rub out all of that background back around the top of the bird there, getting closer and closer to it until we get rid of most of the original layer. Then we'll come back to the rectangular marquee. I'm just going to make a very small selection of his leading leg. Press Ctrl and X, or come up to Edit and down to Cut, and we remove that front leg, and then Ctrl and V, or up to Edit and down to Paste, and back in it goes. Just drop the opacity of this one down to about 60% as well. This just helps us see how it's interacting with the background. And then back to the free transform tool, and I'm going to rotate that leg so that it looks like it's perched on the post. Always helps to zoom in a little bit in these situations so we get a good fit. Maybe a little bit more of an angle there. And that's kind of looking okay, so we'll click the tick, bring the opacity of both layers back up to 100%, just up there at the top of the layers palette. We'll just click on the Move tool there and line that leg up a little bit better, and then come up to Layer, down to Merge Down to reunite our crow with his dislocated leg. And now I'm just going to continue to use the Eraser tool, just knocking down the size a little there and bringing its hardness up, just once again pressing Shift and the right square brackets key, and then I'm going to continue to get rid of all of that background that we don't want. Now this requires a bit of a steady hand, just taking his leading claw off there so it looks like it's wrapped around the back of that post. Keep on changing the size of the brush so you don't delete too much of that layer. And because this is going to take me a little bit of time, I'll join you in a moment. Okay, so there's our crow all nicely separated from his background now. And I'm just going to click and drag that layer up the layer stack there, because at the moment it's much too dark because it's being affected by our other adjustment layers. Just set it below the hue saturation layer and it should look fine. Still on the eraser tool, just going to drop its opacity to about 20%, and this really helps in places like these feathers on his undercarriage there. We just keep clicking and we can blend them in quite subtly. We'll do it around his tail feathers too, just to get a nice kind of believable join going on there. And if I just come out to a full view again, you'll see that I've given him a little friend down in the bottom right hand corner, that one coming from the file called crow2.jpg, which you'll also find amongst the start images, and that's giving us some nice balance now on the thirds of the image. One thing though, on close inspection you will see, is that our crow is a little bit sharper than our fence post. So we need to add a little bit of blur to him just to marry the two together. So with that particular layer selected in the Layers palette, come up to Filter, down to Blur, and pick Gaussian Blur. Now in this case, a radius of about 1.5 pixels should do the trick. Now, that might be a little bit excessive. Let's take it down to 1 pixel. All we're trying to do here is soften the bird a little bit so it looks like it's part of the same scene. Click OK, come out to a full view again, and it's really starting to come together. The final thing we're going to look at is adding a little bit more contrast using the dodge and burn tools. So click on the background layer, and then we'll first do a little bit of burning just by holding down the mouse button over the dodge tool and picking the burn tool from the list. We use a nice big soft brush, set the range to shadows, the exposure to around 3%, and then we'll just click and work the burn tool over the sky there, just darkening that further down and making it look a lot more brooding. We'll just keep darkening that sky until those birds at the top are almost kind of starting to disappear in with the shadow there. Bring it down to bring out some of these clouds on the right hand side, and we'll also just use it set to mid-tones to start with, just clicking underneath our bottom right crow here, just darkening the area around his feet, making it look like he's got a natural shadow. And once again, that just kind of helps to tie him in with his surroundings. We'll just come over to the dodge tool now, and just like before, we'll set it to a nice large brush around 500 or 600 pixels, and then work it around some of those highlighted areas, keeping this one running along the lead-in line of the image, those fence posts, drawing our eye into the windmill in the distance. And finally, I'm just going to give our fence post crow a little bit of separation from the background just by selecting mid-tones from the range and clicking around him, and you'll see there the sky just lightening off a little bit and making his kind of virtually silhouetted form stand out a lot nicer. Okay, well, you can keep using the dodge and burn tools in this way until you've brought out all of the contrast in the image that you want to, but I think that's looking pretty good, so it's time to come up to layer and down to flatten image. And there we have our completed and rather fantastical looking composite landscape. And I'm sure you'll agree that it's a lot more interesting than our starting point. Nothing really wrong with this shot. We could have done a few bits and pieces to make it more pleasing, but instead we decided to pull out all the stops and end up with something really dramatic, really exciting, and best of all, really easy to do in Photoshop. So give it a try with the images provided, but do make sure that you have a go at making your own composite landscapes, because you're sure to come up with some really great images. See you next time.